live.
We live? Right on. Right on. Okay. Welcome back. Episode 7, weekly podcast, Conversations from the Underground. Y'all know what it is by now. If you haven't, go back to the beginning, see what's going on. We starting here with our conversation. It's my turn first. How you been, brother?
Doing good, man. I've been saying, I'm a little sick, but we gotta knock this thing out. The semester's coming to a close. Everybody's worried about grades. The holidays are now kind of past us, but not really because we're back into the swing of, I guess, like Black Friday, consuming this and getting ready for Christmas and stuff like that. But man, my focus right now is just trying to cover this content. We've already had a podcast about time and whether or
Yeah.
not if we have enough time to do this and do that. And man, I'm running out of it. But I'll have to figure out a way to manage. And I already have like some of my lectures recorded, so I can drop them on them when they need to. I was trying to figure out whether we deal with this a lot, where I have to figure out, do I go deep or do I go far?
Mm.
If I go deep, if we have these prolonged, in-depth conversations in my classroom, that's great. However, we don't get to cover the extent of the material we would like. Um, and so it makes it tough. I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, man, when we ultimately get to teaching about, 2020, will we cover the pandemic? I don't
Mm.
know. I don't think
Mm.
so, because when I think about US history, we never cover the Spanish flu. When we talk about world history, I still probably don't think they cover the Spanish flu. I mean, you teach more world civ than I do. Did you cover the Spanish flu?
In World Civ, I don't because of the nature of the way my class is constructed. I can't get to very many micro histories like that. I'm dealing with larger
Right.
concepts. But
Because of the scope of and scale of time that you have to consider, right? So
exactly.
I'm thinking, man, when we come back to US history, I'm not sure if we'll talk about the pandemic. I mean, do you think that the pandemic hit us harder than the Spanish flu did in US history?
It's a great question. I mentioned the Spanish flu briefly because of the year 1919. I think is like one of the most important years in world history and U.S. history as well. And I mentioned it there just to show the devastation and problems. I think percentage wise of the population that died, Spanish flu was more significant than this one. But in
Hmm.
terms of the impact on society, on culture, on the trajectory of where a lot of things that we do, which direction they're going to go, our daily lives, the effect, the imagined effect, I think also is far more profound for this one than it is for that one.
And why do you think that's the case then? If a lot of times we tend to look at the severity of a situation based on the outcome or the effect, and for the Spanish flu, the death toll worldwide was, astronomic.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Yet, I mean, shortly thereafter, America and the world kind of operates as if nothing never occurred. There were no prolonged effects, if you will. At least looking back and taking world history and US history in consideration on what we tend to focus on. We don't focus on it at all. Why is it that you think that maybe this time around there are these profound um, effects or consequences with the pandemic?
Yeah, good point. I took a couple of medical history classes in grad school, and we read a book about plagues and pandemics and stuff like this. And these issues at the early 20th century were significant in the sense of transforming medical culture to start searching for remedies to big problems like this. Like we didn't have a vaccine yet when the Spanish flu came out. I don't think for a flu vaccine on really any significant level yet. But maybe one could argue that it became far more, lot more money was thrown at it, and it became a lot more significant in the search for more um, um, types of like vaccines to cure these public health concerns. And I think by the time we did, you're looking at the second half of the 20th century, we have a lot more understanding of these viruses, and when we feel as though we can get a handle on something, or that we have a tool to combat something, I feel like we magnify it a lot more, and we start thinking about it, and start talking about the urgency of it. I'll give you an example of this. It reminds me of an excellent book. Can't remember the name of it, but the author is Joseph Gusfield. Wonderful book about the culture of drinking and driving, or something of this nature. The book is essentially about how we create public problems, and the book focuses on like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and these sort of like social organizations that pop up when a particular incident occurs, or more of them occur, and we throw all of our focus and attention at the problem, to the point that we may distort the actual concern more than it need be in some cases. And it's an excellent book, where he starts out in that chapter talking about how go any non-wet city, which is the majority of cities in the United, or any wet city they call it, right, where alcohol could be served. And you got hundreds of people all in one location drinking, all of which are going to leave their some of them may have like designated drivers or whatever the case may be, but the vast majority of people in bars drinking are going to get in their car and drive off and go their home. And there are all these people drinking and driving on a daily basis that don't get in trouble. But we kind of like ritualistically persecute some that get caught, and magnify the problem to throw attention at it. Whereas prior to like the 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, the amount of people drinking and driving were rampant, and there were still problems, there were still accidents and fatalities. But now, if you look at it, we've thrown so much focus on a problem that we oftentimes magnify it and create these concerns in order to create a whole industry around those concerns that we can now invest in and make money in and things like that. And I feel like this pandemic is swept up in that culture. Not to say that this isn't an issue, not to say that you shouldn't take care of yourself, and you shouldn't, when research shows that you can do something for the benefit of yourself and others, why not do it? But that would be something separate from the way in which they try to really just zero in your mind on something as if it is like the world's about to end, or like, we're treating this like it's a comet coming directly at Earth right now, and that's what it needs to be like, right? And I think there's a tendency to do that in order to try to drum up support to fix a problem, which again can be good, but on the other hand, particularly when it comes to young cats, particularly when it comes to people of color who've been abused by medical racism that's pretty deep in this country's history, it's kind of like, fool me once type deal, because like you've done this to me before, and I'm going to be a lot less likely to be listening to your rhetoric, because I don't trust the system. And so there's it's a double-edged sword kind of thing. If you make something out of maybe there's a problem, but if you magnify that problem and people see and can understand that you're magnifying something to an extent that maybe is a little bit overboard, it can lead to a reaction to where they don't want to do it, you know.
I wonder how much of an impact, and I can imagine there is an impact. There's got to be the variable does exist in regards to this individual's book with drinking and driving. How one could, exaggerate or magnify a problem that might be minuscule, but because we're putting so much attention on it, it can magnify the problem. How much media plays a role in that.
Oh yeah.
And at the turn of the 1950s or so, where we're beginning to see televisions in the homes of many, if that would lend itself to that exaggeration or that magnification. And then for this generation, social media lending itself and our media. I mean, I remember, we're not the pandemic wasn't far, it was yesterday in the grand scheme of things. The pandemic was yesterday. And I'm watching the news and they have a death toll. And like this many people are dying today. This many people are dying around the world. And now it's nowhere. It's not even like it's not even being brought up, the amount of cases, the amount of deaths. But in that immediacy of the pandemic, the media, especially social media, was putting out this notion that it's every and obviously it was everywhere. It wasn't an isolated episode. It's not like only the United States was dealing with it. Many nations were shutting down. Many nations had protocol. Many nations were developing responses, national responses to the pandemic. But maybe because we had multiple platforms of media, it it uh, accelerated or exponentially increased the public's perception of the problem, magnified the problem. Now, in the 1919s, I can't imagine there was a medium out there that was influencing the masses outside of, I hate to say it, but hearsay, maybe what
Yep.
somebody read in their local news. I was watching a movie the other day, a horror film that's set in 1919.
Hmm.
It's a horror film, and they referred to, and there are people living on a farm, and it takes place in Texas, and they are living on a farm, and they make reference to how they wouldn't allow families to come over because they didn't want to catch the ick. They were worried if you had the germ. That's how they were referring to it. And obviously, they were talking about the Spanish flu. Um, and people were cautious. People were wearing masks, and this is in Texas. Now, it's not a historically accurate documentary. It's a horror film that dramatized the situation. But at the same time, when the families did come together, they weren't sitting around a television watching the news. They weren't on their phone, indulging or taking in their own personal perspective on an issue. It was a lot of, hey, what did you find out? What did you hear? What do you think? And if you could trust that individual, then you just carry that with you as, bond. Like that was the way things were supposed to go. I'm imagining these platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, and of course, cable news exaggerated and exacerbated because they have I don't want to say that they have an economic interest in doing so because their desire is to inform the public. Yet at the same time, they are competing for, um, viewership.
Man, I wish this is an example of one of those times where I wish we could know beforehand what we were going to talk about, but because I'm not as experienced with this response as I wish I was, because I've only really taught it once. I don't know how much I rarely get a chance to get past the civil rights unit in my 1302 class, which I kind of bring into the 90s and sometimes a little bit to the present. But that one time that I taught history 1302 backwards, starting with the present day and going beyond, which I think was last semester, Mateo was in that class, great undergrounder, before he went to UTA. And I remember having a conversation with him in that class. I wish I could more articulate it more accurately here, but because I don't get to the 1980s and 90s as much, I just am not familiar with it. But there was this merger at this point. I can't remember what to call it or how it goes about, but somehow where news media became far more prevalent in our lives. There was some sort of post Reagan kind of legislation of some sort that kind of like made the type of news we get much different, where they're immediate news, breaking news, 24/7. You're looking at something, you're watching it constantly, you're watching the whole thing go down, and it becomes a Truman Show-esque type thing. To reference a great film about these people looking at this man who's living without knowing that people are watching him. It
Well,
almost go ahead.
well, the first and there's no fact checking going on here, guys. So Google this stuff later if you want to. But
Yeah.
to my knowledge, the first 24-hour news station was created by Ted Turner, and that's going to be CNN. We never had news constantly. News would be something you caught at 6 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, after the day
Right.
had been completed. And so families would have a designated time in which they consume something, the same way that we consume football on Sundays or whatever. But when it became 24/7,
Yeah.
when you're constantly inundated with something, it becomes things become a lot more real when you're constantly exposed to something. If you're watching shows about um, um, home invasions, if every other show you're watching a crime story about home invasions or being robbed, then you're creating an environment in which you live in where you're expecting this to occur.
Right.
So
Right.
if we're watching news 24/7 and everything has to be breaking, everything has to be political, everything has to be. And now the question is I don't think there's a problem with having news every day, but the problem is that at certain hours of the day you're fighting for viewership.
Right.
And the
And
only way you can maintain said viewership is if you're presenting a headline that's attractive. There used to be a show we grew up watching called America's Most Wanted.
yeah.
Okay. And I would watch that show. I'm a kid, man. I'm 8 years old. I'm like, oh my God, there are all these crazy criminals out here. America's Most Wanted. And most of these scenes or episodes about like child abductors or criminals. And I'm like, oh no, oh no. And most of them were not caught. But sometimes, every so often, they would catch someone. And I would think to myself, I was like, this is a great show. Because even though they may not catch them all the time, the fact that they caught one should be enough.
Mm.
This should be this should always be on, because then that way it's public information we should all be aware about. This person is out there kidnapping kids. Let's keep an eye out. The show got canceled.
Mm.
Why did the show get canceled? Because of ratings. I'm like, what? Why? Like you
Funny.
not only saved one kid's life, you might have saved families. You might have saved a wife from abuse. You might have saved a
But you ain't
killer
got the
off the
viewers.
street.
It don't matter because it's about viewership.
And even after you saved one, if you don't maintain the viewership,
Right.
then you're gone. In this
So
particular
like
case, when you're running a show that's 24/7 and you don't maintain the viewership, you're gone.
yeah, and just to reinforce that fact checking stuff, I can't remember where, but I can tell you it's the only time I've ever read, and I had to speed read it. That last chapter of American Yawp, that textbook that some of us use occasionally in our classes. If we look at that last chapter, I think, or maybe the second to last chapter or something, it talks a lot about this. It's like a deregulation or something of the media of some sort that occurred that gave them this capacity to be more. than just this nightly news, state the facts, and stuff
Okay.
like that. It became deeply political as well. And so now you see all of these agendas connected to it, which can be a problem because, like we said earlier, some people see through the bullshit, and oftentimes throw it all out because of that, instead of picking the important parts of it that we do need to pay attention to. But I think this goes into our conversation about media, uh, TV, and social media, and maybe the momentum that it brings to a topic or a subject or an idea. The momentum of media um, has surpassed anything I think humanity was prepared for. When we have this Truman Show type of thing where it's with us all the time and it's magnifying these types of things, man, I couldn't have said it any better than you did about how it centralizes our attention on something, magnifies the problem even more. It reminds me of a point that this Yuri Harari guy makes in Homo Deus, which is the second book of two great ones that he wrote. Sapien was the first one. Homo Deus, where he argues that we're no longer Homo sapiens. We're like this Deus, this new species, because of how much technology and our lives have shifted our culture and our way of life. And he points out that today more people die from what they put in their body, from the amount of sugar that they eat, from the amount of uh, problematic food that they eat, than people who die in war every year.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Way more than people who die from terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
But our focus is on terrorism so much that we got a lot of people who are not willing to go to school anymore because they're fear that they're going to get shot up, or they don't want to go to a concert anymore out of fear of terrorism or something like that. But they don't think twice about taking that sip.
Right.
When that's the killer, right? And so this is a good example of media. This is the power of media. The media is so powerful that it can make you think and believe and act something uh, that may not actually be what you should be focusing all your attention on. Um, there are other issues in your life that are far more immediate to the problem, but the attention is focused on here so that we can create a public problem. That's what I like about that Gus Field book, because it's about creating a problem. You latch on to momentum, like the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, latched on to the momentum of women's rights, latched on to the momentum of um, spousal abuse, latched on to the momentum against the consumption of alcohol, put it all together to create prohibition, which caused a lot more problems than the alcohol did in the first place, right? You could say the same thing about, cannabis legalization or illegalization. Criminalizing cannabis caused a lot more problems than leaving it legal. But it also came with an entirely new Federal Bureau of Narcotics that spent trillions of dollars and opened up jobs for people and created a whole institution, right? First prohibition, and then once we flipped that at the end of the 20s, now you go into the 30s and you replace it with narcotics fears, so that you can channel that amount of income. So there's this sort of ulterior motive behind maybe these public problems that I think I really like this book by Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of the Scientific Revolution, where he argues that science is kind of like this as well. We throw money at something. Science is maybe not as objective as we might think, because science always begins with funding. And what we decide to fund influences where our attention in the public is going to
Right.
go. And it focuses the attention in here. And if there are anomalies in the system that maybe don't fit into our funding agenda, we kind of sweep them under a rug and
Right.
pretend they're not there until those anomalies keep magnifying. And then once they get too big that you can't ignore them, it leads to this paradigm shift, this big structural change. That's how we went from Aristotelian forms of science, for example, to Newtonian forms of science, or then left the Newtonian world to the Einsteinian one. And so you have these models, right, that big shifts occur after there's all these little anomalies that keep adding up. And I think you can apply that to the momentum of media, shifting our attention and focus in one direction, so that we can magnify a problem, throw money at the problem, and maybe shift opinion and directions, right? Because these media outlets, you being on Facebook, you being on Twitter, or you being on MSNBC or Fox or wherever, they're not just giving you news, dog. That's not the purpose, right?
Right.
They're not just giving you news. They're presenting it in a very crafted way, so that they can, shift the momentum towards a direction that the funders want it to be. Now, that's not to say you can't believe anything, that nothing's worth paying attention to, or nothing's, it's all a lie. It's all fake news. In fact, great marketers like Trump are able to exploit that
Right.
aspect, right? And make us sort of think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater entirely. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that we do need to acknowledge and be aware that these media outlets that we're participating in, they're more than just information. They're crafting a narrative that's important for us to pay attention to.
And what I find interesting is that with various platforms like Twitter, which give individuals a greater outreach to inform and influence, there's a tendency to only focus on negative individuals.
Mm.
And it's like, and that we have, like, if you believe that these individuals have the ability to influence negative narratives, then where are the individuals who have the ability to influence positive narratives? How is it, or why is it those aren't focused on? Those aren't given the attention? Because if you can believe it to exist on one end of the spectrum, then you have to believe it can exist on the other end of the spectrum, but yet you can't provide me with one or not as many problematic examples as you would a Trump. What's his kid's name? Nick Fuentes, a Kanye West. How is it that you're so scared and worried about these individuals influencing the narrative? As opposed to being hopeful about someone who's positive, who could also influence the narrative. And it's not an indictment against said individual. It might be an indictment against society at large, that we tend to only care about the glary and the gloom for the same reason as to why, we'll pay more attention to a breaking news update about a shooting down the street than we will pay attention to an individual who fed 15 families due to a startup program he created.
Right.
Like, why do our society tends to only want to focus on these negatives as opposed to positives? And is it just our society? Is it society at large? Now that we have to include society at large that involves themselves on these social platforms like Twitter, which has an outreach of what I could be wrong, but I don't think as many people are on Twitter as people think they are.
Yeah, I have no idea, honestly.
I would say, and I'm not, we can fact check it later. I can look it up now. 30 million.
It's probably gonna be more than that, right? Don't some of these people have more than 30 million Twitter followers?
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, but that's worldwide. I'm talking about Americans.
Oh, Americans, got you. Yeah, it's a good question. I have no idea, honestly. I have no idea. Be something worth knowing. Maybe hopefully I'll remember to think about that when this is over and check it. I have a Twitter account. It's the only social media I have. It's not my name ain't on it. I just kind of
And
use
that's
it.
another thing is like cats have an account, right? But rarely do they post.
Right.
So
It has a
of
lot
the
to do with
individuals who
purpose,
do have an
right?
account, most of them don't post. The
Yeah.
ones that do post, we're talking about a very minuscule percentage of a population that are pushing a narrative, but yet the outside observer who never expresses any type of perspective or position is simply there to observe in a voyeuristic sense is being informed, and we think that that's the truth. I just googled it, and I would almost argue it's I'm looking at it right now. 1 in 5 US adults say they actually use Twitter. That's 23%.
Wow. So that's, what is there, 300 million U.S. Americans?
At least I would
That's
almost argue
everybody.
350.
Yeah, that's counting everybody, and that's adults. So what is there, like 200 something million?
So if 23% of adults are using, now here's the other problem. Now that's saying adults, which means that there could be a usage of Twitter of individuals who aren't adults.
Hey, you're 30
I
million. Wow, close. Is probably in a ballpark range, give or take a little bit. Uh, there are a lot
and
of young kids too.
is that the measure by which we should be influenced of problems, or are we looking at such a minuscule? Um, Again, we're going back to this notion of, are these platforms exaggerating?
Definitely are.
Do they really exist, or are they exaggerated? It's 23% of the population is on that mother.
Yeah.
And then of that, I would almost argue, and I could be wrong, but I thought I heard it somewhere. Only 10% are actively engaged in the sense that they're constantly using Twitter as a means to push something. Most of them are pushing their own brand, their own platform. Hey, this is what I sell. I have an OnlyFans account. Check this out. I have my clothing company. Check that out. Much of the people that are on Twitter, man, it, are bots. On top of that, they're not real people. Um, but yet,
Mm.
our news media and our outlet will look to Twitter as what's trending. What are the people saying? I don't know if that's a viable source.
Yeah, that reminds me of that whole fear of Russian meddling in elections, right? Like, this constant fear about bots and Russians sitting in some kind of like room and sitting all this propaganda, and we're all focusing our attention on them. Like, how do we stop them from doing this? But we're not talking about, well, how do we stop people from listening to what they're saying? I mean, can we think about that? Can we talk about critical thinking skills and leaving it up to people to figure out what not to believe? But this kind of then brings me back to your whole issue of point of like, why is it so negative? I heard several times before. Again, I don't know if it's true, but and I don't know if it's true for Twitter, but I know like some people are like the comment section of YouTube or the comment section of these platforms are some of the most vitriolic things that you see going on, right? And I think that maybe also speaks perhaps to what the answer is of why do people focus so much on negatives. um I don't know the answer, but
What this does tell us is that um, there are various segments of our society that exist, but we fail to, and then we're shocked that they do exist because we live in our bubbles. If you go to YouTube, you're going to see racist comments. Why? Because there are racist people out there. This shouldn't be a shocker. The question is how do we deal with those racial perspectives? How do we
you know
handle
what,
race?
I would also say the vast majority of those racist comments would not necessarily be made by that same individual to someone in person. Many of them are emboldened by the anonymity
Oh, for sure.
that media provides them. And I wonder to what extent that needs to be factored in with our larger question here of why is it so negative and so focused on the negative. Maybe there's something about this mass media kind of trend that brings out the most negative in people, a cathartic sort of sense of channeling their animosity or anger, that also lends us to want to, you know, stop when we see a wreck on the side of the road and end up creating traffic when it don't need to be. But if you got someone, just waving at you, or whatever, doing something nice, it's like, whatever, no big deal. Keep moving along. Um, so we have this tendency, and like you said, if here's the breaking news that's bad, it's like, oh, let's focus on it. Let's attend to it. Maybe it makes us empowered or feel stronger when we see other pain or when we see others hurt. It gives us a sense of power or authority over our surrounding, maybe, or emboldens us. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I have no idea as to why this is the case, but I certainly know that it is the case. I think that and I also think that it fits in somehow, way, shape, or form with this idea of the media becoming this entity other than just news. I think all of this stuff needs to start with us understanding that media is not just an objective presentation of reality. Um, you know, it's very similar to the way we describe our classes, or the way at least I describe my class from day one. Like, there's this enormous line, right? At the beginning of it is 1876, or the beginning of it is early humanity, and the end of it is 1876, or the present day, depending on what class I'm teaching. And in between that time, there's so much stuff that happened, right? Shit. Even in today, just yesterday, if you had a timeline of the day before and then today, so many things have occurred in my life that I won't be able to even explain them all or tell all or even know myself all. And so what we end up doing is picking out these aspects on that timeline to create a story. And the simple fact of picking out certain things itself now removes the process from objectivity. It removes the being just about the facts from the whole case. By simply presenting a narrative of our choice by what we decide to pick from the timeline, we're crafting a narrative. And so that's on the basic level as history, and it gets more magnified when you add elements of media and media personalities and presentation of events and all of these things. When you add that to the equation, you have this very powerful force that is capable of moving herds of people in one direction or another. And what we know in modern consumer mass media society is that those who can move the herd, you know, gain the flock or
Mhm.
gain the power or the money. Even the term influencer, that's a fascinating term. What essentially are you as an influencer? You're moving the herd. You're somehow getting all these people to focus on what you're saying. But as I said, it's not just what you're saying. You're getting all these people to show you you're an influencer because maybe you're moving them in a direction. Um, and that, I think, is an interesting phenomenon that has become more democratized, for better or for worse, perhaps both, um, as time has went on. But it's also become more powerful, more lucrative. Um, so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that
Media and momentum to me is something that we don't tend to oftentimes, you know, momentum is something to me that we don't oftentimes control. We can't control, right? Like in the basketball game, if you got the momentum coming, you don't take out your player. You can't explain why. Maybe this player has been in and he usually takes a break right now. But the momentum's going, so you let him go. You let him go in. Momentum is something you got to learn to take advantage of. Momentum,
Right.
momentum is something that you oftentimes can't dictate. You can try to spark it, but there's no formula to make it happen. Um, it's something you got to attach to. You got to be in the right place, right time type thing. It's this subjective kind of thing.
I just don't understand how, if we can observe and identify how important capitalizing on momentum and emotion to lead a herd is not used by individuals who have what they would argue to be a more positive message. I don't get that, dude. I'm seriously stuck on this. I'm bothered by the fact that there are these narratives, these messages that are perpetuated, and they have harm. They can inflict harm on society at large, and even if they do exist, our only response is to cancel it or eliminate it. It seems that that approach only emboldens, or it creates an environment that pushes them underground, but it doesn't eliminate it, which is why you hear about something referred to as, um, what was it called, man? Um, the silent majority,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
like, and it also, this is why you can't trust public polling
Mm,
anymore,
yeah.
because it used to be, well, the people will tell us the truth. The people will reveal that they're going to vote this way or that way. But it's the fact that our only, and when I say our only approach is to cancel them or subjugate individuals, which means push them into hiding, means now they're not even answering polls or questions that might reveal them. So we have no really clear understanding of the problem in front of us. And then we get surprised come election day. We get surprised. Oh my goodness, 50% of the population likes Trump.
Right.
Who knew? You know why you don't know? Because we've created an environment where, as opposed to providing an alternative perspective that could use intrigue or emotion or capture a momentum, we simply say, no, we're going to just chastise you.
Yeah, man, that's
And,
such a
and
good
that's
point.
and that's how I know you're wrong and I'm right.
Historically speaking, all we got to do is look to history and see what like you said, pushing things underground did. Look what pushing Christianity underground did. It turned it into the largest religion in world history today with 2 billion or more followers. Muhammad went underground in the Arab world when he, after having his revelations. And what has that done? It's turned Islam into the second largest religion in world history. Maybe has been the first in some occasions. But the point is, these were religions that were pushed underground, that were tried to suppress out of fear of the societies, and it just magnified them. They just got stronger, because, as many people before me have said before, whether it be Fred Hampton or Thomas Sankara or any of these other people, where you may kill a revolutionary, uh, but you can't kill the revolution, or you may kill the person who has the idea, but you can't kill an idea. Um, you can sweep it under and try to get rid of everyone, like Shen Shihuangdi tried to do when he burned all of the Confucius books. But China became the most concentrated cultural center of Confucius thought, because when you do those things, you you feed into a forbidden fruit concept that gravitates people to it a little bit more. You empower them by making them feel like they're into something that they're secretive or fighting against underdog mentality, and you generate support for it because look, and maybe this has something to do with get back to your question that's gnawing at you as well about why so much negativity. Uh, Maybe all of this stuff has something to do with this concept of otherization that we tend to focus quite a bit about and quite a bit on. And as American historians, we like to really focus so much on the creation of race and how there really wasn't much of a problem of racism prior to the transatlantic slave trade and the Virginia situation leading up to Bacon's Rebellion. But the fact of the matter is, man, is that people have been otherizing each other since there have been people. We have this knack of getting into this us versus them mentality, and maybe looking at these negative things projects otherization that maybe oftentimes emboldens us at the expense of them. That's not us. That's not, that's them. And we observe these types of things, and we like to kind of see what's happening to them so that we can protect us from it. And even when it's like part of us, like a civil war type thing or a issue going on in our country, you look at it and you're sort of like, well, they did that, or these people did that to them, and let me separate them, let me monsterize them, let me sort of ritualistically persecute them, whether it be these gunmen or these crazy people, they like to say, or drunk drivers, to bring back the whole creating a public problem issue. Essentially, what we're doing is otherizing sections of our society in order to embolden ourselves to them eyes us, if I can create a word, by otherizing the incident and maybe some sort of psychological intoxication comes from this otherization process on a micro level, which is why we focus on it so much, maybe, and which is why media captures it so much. Because, like you said, they're about viewership. They're not about knowledge. About viewership.
Mm-hmm.
There
And,
are
and
some media outlets that are a bit different. You can kind of see the way they talk compared to others, right? But yeah.
yeah, I mean, I when I in regards to viewership and let's piggyback off of this notion of the others and us and them versus them. The us is a collective that I don't think is like there's no single entity that is a personification of us.
Right.
As much as we tend to focus on a villain, so the media will paint Trump as a villain, the media will paint Kanye as a villain, the media will paint Kyrie as a villain, um, or just anybody that happens to stress their concerns. However, we don't have an individual. There's always tends to be this collective, like we as a society condemn this individual. We as a society condemn that individual. Um, I rarely see like if they have a villain, why can't we have a hero? Like, or is our society the hero? And is that okay? Um, is this what our society thinks? The problem with us saying our society thinks this way of that is that it's obvious we're not all on the same page. Our elections show that we're not on the same page. By and large, everything's like 50-50 down the middle for the most part. So how is it that our society or feels this way towards somebody like Trump? That's not the case. Otherwise, Trump wouldn't feel so emboldened to run for office, and Trump wouldn't get the amount of votes that he's about to get if that were the case. So it's not our society. It's a segment of our society that we're not acknowledging as such. We tend to just simply say, well, because I feel that way, our society must feel this way. And that's not true. A segment of our society feels that way. And then even then, we don't have an individual that is the so-called hero. Every great story requires a protagonist and an antagonist. Every great story requires a hero and a villain. I see and hear a lot about the villains. I don't hear enough about the heroes. Like,
I
and
think
do they exist anymore? Is there anyone at this moment that we're going to look back on in 20, 30, or 50 years and we say, this individual was the personification of our humanity during that moment? We can look back at somebody like Dr. King and we can we can pretend, and I'll make it very plain and clear. America wasn't Dr. King. I'm sorry, Dr. King was better than America.
right.
We just wish we could be like him, all the while chastising him, all the while subjugating him, all the while vilifying him till the point of his assassination. And then only after his assassination are we like, oh, you know what? He was kind of cool. Let's name a couple streets after him. Where is our hero? In we have this attitude where it's like, well, this guy's the villain, that guy's the villain, this guy's the problem, that guy's the problem. Um, who is it? And do we need one? Yeah, I also remember this quote, and I believe it's from Ella Baker. Who's a famous civil rights advocate, um, grassroots organizer.
Definitely.
Fundamental in the development of SNCC, which is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Ella Baker goes, strong people don't need a strong leader. She was never needed to be at the forefront of the movement. She was never needed to be at the forefront of SNCC. She goes, you leave it to you leave it to the young people, and they'll make it happen. So maybe our society doesn't need a leader. I don't know, but I mean, I don't feel like I feel at times our society is not what it thinks that it is. And again, that's because um, social media platforms exaggerate it to make us think that that's what it is. Our if social media is telling you that much of America thinks this way, I would almost immediately argue that's not true. We have to take into consideration who's on the platform, who's presenting or articulating the narrative on said platform, what percentage of the population represents that platform, and are we missing a group? And by and large, if you look at the majority of voters in America, they're probably not even on Twitter. They're probably not even on Twitter. And then you get shocked and surprised by elections like 2016.
What comes to my mind is this concept of heroes in hindsight. Um, First off, it's very difficult to determine if someone's a hero in the moment. It could very well be that Martin Luther King does not become a hero if he doesn't die. Maybe he just becomes a Jesse Jackson, who may have had some heroic moments, but becomes less understood as this mythologized figure as time goes on. Or maybe not. Um, Maybe he survives and continues to get vilified even more, and we don't see his heroic nature until much later on in history, very similar to some other historical characters in world history who died without maybe with centuries going by sometimes before their value is understood. So there's that we have to be wary of. Um, and hero. I like the quote: "Strong people don't need strong leaders." Um, because they themselves maybe are leaders without knowing it sometimes. Great leadership tends to come from people who don't notice, who are too busy leading to reflect on their own qualities. So later on, the history books attribute things to them because they don't have time to attribute it to themselves. They're too busy sacrificing themselves for a larger cause, like King was, I believe. Um, but I would also say there is this issue with what I like to call culture wars, which I believe we are in the middle of right now. They pop up occasionally in the United States, different places, different times, different countries, different reasons, different purposes. But in the United States, because we have a essentially non-revolutionary type of government, type of society, where a potential hero, maybe like Barack Obama, sort of becomes part of the system before it's all done, and then ends up as a cog in the wheel. The system is designed like that. It sort of makes it like that, I think. And the only real heroes come from those who are so drastically out of the sphere that perpetuates U.S. institutions and non-revolutionary movement of society. Uh, those they're so far out of that bubble that they never make it through, and they then become heroic for their attempts to try to break this festering cycle that exists in our society that rears up as a war, a culture war occasionally, right?
Heroes
Um,
in solitude.
certainly. We were studying about this guy named Zira Yagub, who was this philosopher in Ethiopia, um, who wrote these beautiful texts in this Ethiopian cave after he was ostracized from society, talking about women's rights well before anyone was even discussing any of these types of things, writing things that um, Enlightenment philosophers wouldn't get to until over a century later. I mean, we're talking early 17th century uh, philosophy that only now are we beginning to look at maybe this guy as a hero, who lived his life in solitude and no one really knew anything about what he was doing back then, but is now coming up to show us all of our misunderstandings and misperceptions of what the continent of Africa was like. And he's a hero in that vein because he was so outside of the bubble of that society that he wasn't recognized as such for a very long time. Or someone like Van Gogh, whose work was just brilliant, but is worth millions now, billions even, and he never made a dime off any of it. So this sort of notion of hero and solitude of people going so much in this direction that goes outside of this bubble, that they eventually become heroic, uh, is worth thinking about. And when we have these culture wars to fit it in there, it becomes more dangerous to step outside because culture wars are defined by a basic 50-50 type split, right? When you got like the one half of the society thinking this, the other half of the society thinking this. I like to tell my students like the O.J. Simpson trial. I remember exactly where I was when it came out. I was in a portable at Nimitz High School in ninth grade, and we still had the little big box tubes where you had to stick with things called VHSs and the big enormous TV that was stuck up there. And the school went nuts. We all rushed out, or all of us, people of color, and some others who were with us rush out, throwing things, going nuts, getting all excited that the black man defeated the system. We didn't know that OJ was, probably guilty, or maybe we did, but it didn't even matter
Right.
because the trial wasn't about whether or not he was guilty or innocent. The trial was like, which side am I on? Send signals about what team I belong to on this culture war. Me supporting OJ meant something about my position in society, about the people I'm with, about the positions I take, not about whether or not he was guilty or innocent. And I think we see those types of things happening in culture wars where the truth, or back to media, the presentation of knowledge is not the only purpose. It's all these other aspects of the momentum on your side to win the culture war, pulling back and forth, leading us to take positions on things that go back to this otherization kind of concept, right? Because you can't have a nation, no nation in the world defines itself by, uh, you know, all inclusive. It's by definition describing what we are not, right? To belong to a group, yes, you're right. You have to have heroes and stuff like that. But what are those heroes about? They're about fighting the antagonist. It's about demonstrating what we're not and trying to preserve that. And that otherness is there at the foundation that breeds combativeness and maybe demands our attention and our focus more, because it puts us on a team and gets us rallying up on the team. And for the same reasons why I wanted to throw all my books out and feel so good when OJ was free when I was in ninth grade, are maybe the same reasons why we want to indulge ourselves in these media aspects of fear, danger. Look at these ideas. They're against us. They're coming to take us away. They're threatening us. We need to do something about it. Go vote. You don't go vote by saying, "Look how great these people are. Let's go vote for these great people." It's like the danger. What do you hear the president oftentimes say? We are facing an existential threat. Like,
Mm-hmm.
right? The motivation is to try to like prop up the boogeyman, and and like you said, vilify these characters in hopes of otherizing them to the point where you rally up your troops. You don't rally up your troops without saying that the enemy's at our doorstep. Uh, we have to come and get ready. And less people are going to want to sacrifice their life if they don't feel like the villain is at your doorstep, or it's there, or it's constant, and it's pervasive, and it's coming to take over, right?
And that's I think what I have a problem with is that media platforms tend to definitely present a threat, definitely present a villain, and present themselves as a source that you can trust,
Hmm.
but don't provide any solution.
Hmm.
We don't provide any. We don't provide any opposite positive reaction. It's never like, and that's my like, yo, you hate this guy with his hate speech, and you're worried about him influencing people with his hate speech. Well, then bring somebody who's gonna provide love speech and make him influence people.
You know
Like,
why? You know why I would say that? I would say because your attention is the purpose. Your intention is the solution. The solution is not to present this new person. The purpose of looking at that villain is to grab your attention. They've won. They've already done it. That's how they got it. That's how they focused. The purpose was to get you to stop there and to tune in and to forget about everything else and look right here, and give all your undivided attention. The purpose isn't to give you a solution. The solution itself is to get your attention, right? And I think that's where the media culture has gone. There's money to be made in 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 grabbing your attention and getting you to stop at this page right here, and getting you to click right here. There's not, there may be money to be made in the solution, but these people's money right now is being made, and how many people are clicking, how many people are showing up, how many people are retweeting, how many people are re-Instagramming or whatever they call it. How many people are thumbs upping? Because we know the science of marketing. That's why I always like to tell students. I never knew I always thought communications was like some whatever major.
It
You
is.
don't
It
do.
still is.
But it's a fascinating subject. All the way down to where we put the colors on labels in very specific ways to grab your attention. I mean, these things go very psychologically deep, man. And what they all show is that the purpose is the presentation, and what they know somehow, some way, that negativity is what gets you focusing more.
Yeah, but the argument of many individuals is that no, the media provided this person a platform, and they're not simply presenting, they're encouraging.
Mm.
Because that's the argument, that why would you give this person this platform? That means that you're supportive of their position. You're encouraging all these people to take action based on this person's negative perspective on the world. If that's the case, if you believe that to be true, then you should also believe that if and when we present a positive individual with a positive perspective, then that would result in positive outcomes or effects. And that's just not true.
Right.
So you can't believe in one. You can't say, well, we shouldn't have a person like Nick Fuentes meeting the president of the United States. How dare, I don't even know if that's that fool's name, but how dare you entertain these ideas? Because the notion is by entertaining the ideas, you're giving fruit to encouragement that will take action a bit later. If that is the case, then let us nurture positive ideas and let's see how far that takes us. It takes us nowhere.
Mm.
Nathan never has it. It's like that's I hate the fact that if this is supposed to be our side, right? That we can't create a counter narrative. We can't create a counter hero. All we can do is say, that's the villain. That's the bad guy. Oh, what's your solution? Nothing. I got to go watch this football game. Good night. Like we have nothing except to point out that that's the problem.
You know what? For some reason, what you just said made this thought come to my mind. I don't know why. Maybe you can help me explain why. I had an image of Rodney King after being brutalized so badly, and the police officers getting off scot-free, saying this meme, I guess before there were memes, can't we all just get along? I don't know why that came to my mind right there when we're talking about positivity and negativity. Um, but I do know that whole scenario and that situation with Rodney King was all about that negative stuff, and this idea of can't we all just get along maybe is a good poignant, I don't know, thought of why maybe that tells us a little bit as to why we can't somehow focus more on positivity. I don't know.
It's like, I mean, it's not even that. It's like, like, it doesn't mean that we have to be like, you know, eating, happy lollipops all day and drinking
Kumbaya.
sun-kissed drinks. It's not that, dude. It's just like, all it has to be is, yo, if you think that that's the villain, what do we, other than ostracizing and vilifying and canceling the individual? Because all you do, if you don't kill them, you create resentment, anger, frustration, and it foments itself into a silent underground movement of individuals who come back and they and it, dude, it's you
Fear of
know, and
platforming. That's a very interesting phrase there. Fear of platforming, or just platforming in general. What does that mean in our society today? Something that's always bothered me since we've been working together, maybe over the past 5 or 6 years. I don't know that it was like this when we began. Maybe it was, and I'm just not reflecting on it enough yet at this moment. But this culture of universities not entertaining inviting a speaker to their campus. I always thought
weak.
the better platform is to invite that person, but then invite me at the same time.
That's right.
Uh, Instead of silencing a position, put them on a table with someone else uh, who can go at it and make this person's uh, ideas shrink in front of everybody instead of
They
sweeping
won't
under the rug.
they
Because when
won't
you
do it.
sweep under
And
the
that's
rug,
my
they get
point.
bigger.
It's like, yo, this battle, let's make it happen. If
Right.
this guy has these ideas, I welcome him
Yeah. I
because
love.
I have the skill set, the ammunition, and the fortitude to challenge him
And I'll
on
do it.
said position and
I
say
mean, like,
like, and not everybody has to be a soldier in the game.
absolutely,
Yo,
absolutely.
sit your ass on the sidelines and watch me
Yeah.
do work.
Right.
If this
Go
guy has
find
an
a soldier
argument,
for us, or work to locate the right people. There's all these different roles one can play, right? You don't. Not everyone has to be the one on the stage, but if you get the right person, like that White Lives rally, I love going to that thing. I sat there and talked to that fool till he got sick and couldn't deal with it anymore. Like, you really want to come at me with some stuff? Then you get the right person. I get at you, and then I make you capitulate. And there's nothing better than to shred someone's weak ideas than to make them defend them in front of someone who's not going to give up on them, who's not going to let them go.
right? And in our society, if we can capture that, that should become viral.
Right.
If we allow their 10-second presentation on how I view women or how I view race to go viral, why can't we provide a dismantling of their argument to go viral?
Right
And it's
next to
because we don't even want to engage the enemy. We rather just simply, again, ostracize, vilify, and
smooth.
quarantine the problem.
Right.
And all you're doing is allowing it to fester and develop and grow to be a situation that we're now asking questions. Well, why do people? I mean, how is it that they won? Why did like because you don't listen.
Right.
You're too busy in your echo chamber, which social media develops because we do cancel voices. We don't listen to the other perspective. We know that somebody I like doesn't like them. And as opposed to actually watching or entertaining the content, I will just run with the fact that, well, this person I like doesn't like them. So that means that I don't have to like them. We can look at a lot of the things that we've discussed where did people really listen to that SNL monologue by Chappelle? Have you ever watched Chappelle stand-ups
Mm.
like in their entirety? Have you ever listened to a Kanye West interview in its entirety? And by and large, that's not helpful. But um, do we actually digest material, or simply are we um, piggybacking?
Yo, man, that's so great that you said that because I didn't get to talk to you about this. We had a conversation, I think, over text about some of the stupid things Kanye has said lately. And one of the things that people keep bringing up is this idea where he said 400 years of slavery, that sounds like a choice.
Mhm.
And, like, let me just give an example of what you just said. Instead of like really investigating maybe other ways in which that could have been a profound statement, we dismiss it as insane and nonsensical and just out of his mind. But once I said something like that, it came to my mind, and I tried to like point this out to you, but it just wasn't working out, so I just deleted it. It was taking me too long. But there's a song uh, that Goody Mob sings on their first Soul Food album called Omni, which we've talked about at a presentation before. Man, and it was so profound, where he says something kind of similar that just kind of drew a blank right now, but um where he says something like putting our stuff together, coming together, something. Ain't no such thing as a 1995 slave. You brought that shit on yourself. Now, I'm trying to deal with a bad hand already dealt. I used to trust in my preacher, but nowadays my Mac 11 is the one and only teacher. And there's a phrase right there where he says, like, "Ain't no such thing as a 1995 slave. You brought that shit on yourself." Like, um, one can become part of this slave mentality that I think Cujo was trying to get at right there in that song, where he's like, uh, you know, we're dealt a bad hand. I was dealt a bad hand. You were dealt a bad hand. But when you're dealt a bad hand, you can become a slave to those bad hands. And you can go off and do all of these other things for self gratification because you're in a bad situation and you're becoming a slave to the system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying whether or not Kanye had a deep thought behind his phrase or not, but one could, if one was interested in giving one the benefit of the doubt, could deconstruct that sentence of slavery sounds like a choice and develop a very different meaning for that phrase that has nothing to do at all with being a slave in 1865 uh, and not deciding to run away. Like, you could be resisting in other different ways, and that phrase could be construed as trying to get you to liberate yourself from the confines of what a system tries to make you believe, right? And particularly Kanye loves to be contrarian, and there are a lot of black people who focus on Democrats becoming Democrats, and that arguably hasn't got the true form of liberation that many people have wanted. And so he could make the argument that you be buying into this system is kind of like this slave mentality, and it could have been something very profound, but it wasn't. Now, coupled with a lot of other stupid things that he said, and adding it all together, maybe he didn't mean anything profound about it. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we rarely try to engage in dialogue with people who have different opinions and beliefs or say things in such ways. We rarely engage to try to meet uh, an argument and tease out something valuable about what someone who is being portrayed as the opposite of us or on the other side of us says. We rarely engage in that meeting common ground to find an enlightened point about something that may sound controversial, and we just immediately dismissed it, right?
We do that
This
all the
is an
time.
example.
We do that all the time. And that's what I try to tell my students is like, yo, just because we understand that a bulk of an individual's perspective may be problematic, that doesn't mean that they don't have these moments or these flares for uh, insightful knowledge.
Right.
Um, and I give this statement at times, like if I tell you 2 + 2 is 4, and you go, okay, 2 + 2 is 4. Great. And you can go and look that up. You can go to a math book and 2 plus 2 is 4. You can go online and see 2 plus 2 is 4. And other people have also said, oh, you know what? 2 plus 2 is 4. I'm not just going to take what Mr. Solis just told me that 2 plus 2 is 4, because I'm going to go. I have the propensity to go and look this up if I want to. Here's the problem with most of America. They don't look anything up, and they just operate off of what they think they know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm telling you 2 plus 2 is 4. Then I start shoving marbles up my butt, one by one. And then you go, ugh, is he shoving marbles up his butt? And yes, I am. And you're like, what the? That doesn't mean 2 plus 2 is not 4. And what I mean by that is, just because someone does something that is crazy or problematic doesn't refute the fact that they might have been dropping knowledge in one
Sure.
instance or another.
Sure.
But no, there's a tendency in our society that, no, man, because he puts on that red hat, you can't listen to him anymore.
Right.
He's got a hat that says "Make America Great Again." I've shut off listening to you. He works with Donald Trump. I'm not listening to that anymore. There's no room for, and again, it goes back to this notion of them versus us, the others, this notion of race politics or identity politics, tribalism, whatever, um, jargon of the moment we're deciding to focus on. The reality is that, at least for me, regardless of who the individual might be, if we're going to identify that person as an individual, as a existential threat, or their position as a threat, or their policies as a threat, why aren't we providing a viable alternative? If we have a person to come to speak at the campus who is a known racist and is going to be giving his speech on, how the Holocaust is a myth, why don't we have a viable alternative to counter it?
Right.
And for you and myself, we encourage it.
Right.
That doesn't mean everybody has to encourage it. People make the argument, well, no, we shouldn't even give him a platform because that gives somebody the possibility to influence him. Okay, so you mean that that means that you're acknowledging there's power in the platform.
Right.
Then use it powerfully.
Yeah. Put me up.
Use it productively.
Yeah.
You
Put
don't.
me up there with them. And then what happens is we get into a situation where now this individual is being forced to leave their platform because they can't deal with me anymore. And now where does the power go? Now what just happened to his power? Right? Now what just happened to his power? Instead of dismissing Kanye, come over here and listen and have a debate with him to where he gets so frustrated that he leaves and he doesn't want to have the conversation with you anymore. And then now where did his power go? It just got sapped, right? And so because you don't feel comfortable, I can't be on the platform with everybody. There's things I can't speak about and things that I won't, but there's other people who will, and we got to find them, right? So instead of like removing the platform and creating the forbidden fruit and turning a cult of Christianity into a massive religion, or a underground Islam into a massive religion because the way you treat it, bring it up, have a discussion about it, platforming, meet that platform on the same level, and then go to work until they give up. Because if you got the strong enough voice combating that platform, then you can suck the air out of that movement. You can
And,
kill the momentum,
and
right?
I think that if you watch this Piers Morgan interview
Mm.
with Kanye West, it's very clear. You can't have a productive conversation with him.
Yeah, he gets frustrated and
Yeah,
leaves and gets angry.
go watch the interview with him and Lex Friedman.
Yeah, so
You
true.
cannot
So
have
true. And so
an
what ends up
intellectual
happening is
conversation.
what ends up happening is you keep feeding in this. He knows the reaction he's going to get when he says stupid stuff, and it increases his platform. And he knows that no one's going to want to listen to him, so he'll say more stupid stuff. But if everyone would air the whole thing, and you see and you have these dialogues and you have these discussions, perhaps a little bit more constructively, instead of then he either comes to terms or looks like a fool and quits. Um, Either way, you win. You deflate the platform that you just, by dismissing, you just magnified, and you just emboldened and empowered by bringing it to the table and combating it with these logical ideas. uh you know Another good example would have been, instead of like sitting here and trying to make Kyrie go meet in private with all of these people, blah blah blah, do all these other types of things, get on the platform, have somebody who knows the film, he knew the film, have a conversation about the film, and let it air out right there so that people can see right there through the debate how well can Kyrie support the ideas in the documentary compared to someone else who's refuting them. And then the support kind of wanes or increases, right? And but when you're like, oh, he's anti-Semitic, this is an anti-Semitic film, everyone I've heard say that never once explained why it's anti-Semitic, never once mentioned even watching it or anything like.
No, because
uh
we're running with the narrative. What someone told me, this is bad, so now I have to believe it's bad.
right.
But did I
But what,
actually go and do the research?
but
No.
what did we do? Remember one of our first historic underground events where we watched that Loose Change
Oh
documentary?
yeah,
uh
yeah.
we paid money to be able to show that film in the cafeteria and invited all these people, and some of these people had some wilding out ideas. You remember that? I'm like,
Mhm.
yo, wow, okay. Everyone was there to witness it. We responded to them, we elaborated on them, we try to tell people about signals and scary music, and the, the 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 process by which people come to gain attention, and the little subtle ways that people have to uh, get people on their side. Essentially, are cultivating critical thinking skill. We don't do that enough in our society. In fact, we take funding away from that. Right? We don't want to fund more classes. In fact, we don't have enough people in our classes, then these classes have got to go. And nobody needs African American history for their degree. So therefore, it's not going to get taught very much, and no one's going to come in there. Or instead of saying, you know what, these are important courses that we should promote because they focus on critical thinking skills. Critical thinking skills are very important, just like STEM skills are very important. But you can't subtract one for the other. And unfortunately, um, that's back to this whole point of media, which kind of is the same thing. It's not about truth, dog. It ain't about any of this stuff. It's about attention, and that culture war, otherization breeds that. They know it. And it ain't about critical thinking skills, dog. It's about bodies in seats and tax-paying dollars to get those bodies, and justifying my job of holding X amount of meetings and talking about X amount of this, and having enough people making A, B's, and C's so that we can keep regurgitating the process, and our bellies get bigger in the process with our salaries, right? And it's like we're always feeling like we're beholden to something. Instead of seeking that critical thinking knowledge, which can be difficult and can be uh, sometimes controversial and not what a lot of people want to hear. But as I was just describing to my sister before we got on this call, man, sometimes, what you don't want to hear is the most important thing for you to hear at that moment. Sometimes that which you so desperately feel like you need is really that which you need to be removed from. Uh,
Yeah, it's like
and
this. A person will say, "Well, Eric, we don't need to have a discussion about this. I already know how I feel about this." You're 23. Relax.
yeah, for
If
real.
you already think you know how you feel about an issue, at the age of 23, considering your education, considering the work that you probably put in or not have put in, we could probably just at the very least be honest and say, there are a lot of things I don't know. But once I know a bit more about this, then I will for sure have a firm understanding on how I feel about this, or why I for sure have an understanding why the other side may feel that way about that. And I don't have to agree with you to understand you. And that, I think that's another problem, is like we don't, where there's a tendency for us to not to even try to understand the other side.
Right.
And again, because we conflate understanding with agreement. That if I give this person the platform, I agree with them. No, I'm trying to understand them.
Right. That goes back to this whole concept of an argument. Like that's a negative word today. When we think of the word argument, it's sort of like, oh, they got into an argument. Like that's a bad thing. There's an issue there. But in the philosophical tradition, an argument is this sort of like stimulating engagement to try to seek common ground. And so really what we call argument is not really argument. It's more like combating each other with words and trying to win as opposed to trying to understand. And uh, unfortunately, when we're in these culture wars, understanding is the last thing on people's mind, and it gets replaced with winning, combating. Uh, Man, if you're finished with your bachelor's degree in a higher education and you haven't professed yourself as a communist, as a socialist, as a libertarian, as an anarchist, as a conservative, or as a progressive, then I would say I feel sorry for you. I think you need to start over. You probably didn't get the right education. Uh, Maybe you need to follow in some of the courses with some of the professors that I took. That's why I tell people, regardless of whatever your major is, you should take some philosophy classes. You should take some history classes. You should take some anthropology classes, and you should take some sociology classes um, with good people who aren't just there to get a paycheck, but who genuinely are fascinated with knowledge. Because you'll notice when you find genuine scholars and intellectuals, they have war
Mhm.
ideologies on their chest for X amount of time. May not be very long. My one of my favorite mentors, Dr. Reinhardt, used to always say that he was a communist for about 3 nanoseconds, but nevertheless was one regardless in the process. Um, because you got to try these things on, man. You're so willing to sit in front of the mirror and try on 10, 15 outfits before you go somewhere just to go mess around, do some nonsense, but you're not willing to try on ideas that are like so central to living and being. Don't be so scared.
Right.
Try these things on.
And those things don't even have to be for you, right? They don't have to be for you, but it does give you an understanding of why they might be for other individuals.
Sure.
We had that conversation in class regarding whether or not if Christianity hurt or helped the African
Yeah.
American community.
Right.
There was a statement that was made where it was along the lines that, first off, religion and Christianity or organized religion is ridiculous in the first place, and that's fine. However, a lot of people believe in that,
Right.
and for myself or someone else, we don't have to believe in that. But I think it might be helpful if we understand why they believe in that.
Right.
And we can't understand that other side unless we're willing to do, as you just said, entertain, try on, um, have these conversations that may be uncomfortable because it may expose a little bit about ourselves
Sure.
and a lot more about them. All it's going to do is further cement how I feel or introduce me to something new. So in the end, it should always be win-win.
Right.
But outside of that, yo, we're almost on 2 hours.
You're kidding me. It's been that long?
No. Yeah.
Dang, we need to sum up then. Well,
My thing's that too.
man, I got an interesting quote that's been on my mind for a while since we've been talking by Jim Morrison. Whoever controls the media controls the mind. That fits pretty well with some of the stuff that we've talked about. Um, if we can add a little caveat to it, how controlling the mind maybe also from a reactionary point of view, those who control the media control the mind in the sense that they try to sway people in one direction. But as we've said, by trying to sway someone in a direction, it could lead to a knee-jerk reaction to make them go down the other direction. But I would still say that the media narrative is directing their attention either towards it or against it. So I really like that quote about how media and mind kind of go hand in hand.
Which is dope, because we're entering a new era where the media has become, um, I guess the word is it deaggregated,
Mm.
where we no longer subscribe to state media, national media, um, traditional channels like NBC, ABC, CBS. More and more people are moving away from even cable networks like Fox News or CNN, that we're trusting much more local, influential individuals. And so they are now these new purveyors or suppliers of information. So that means that the media um, is way more diverse, and therefore we should have more diverse ideas. However, I think though a problem that we originally were discussing was that how is it that these minute or minority discussions are dominating the landscape and exaggerating problems? That's where much of this began. In the exaggeration of said problem or said villain, I felt that there wasn't a counter solution provided for a proper hero or agenda. So that leaves me with the quote, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Mm. I like that. Who's that?
It's from The Dark Knight. You gotta,
Oh
you
yeah,
gotta, you gotta bone up on your Batman quotes, dog.
right. I should have known that because I've heard you say that before.
Yeah, but as you mentioned in regards to Dr. King, he could have just been a Jesse Jackson, but because of his assassination, he's the one he's goes down in history as probably one of the most influential Americans of all time.
Right.
The only individual that we celebrate nationally with a holiday.
Yep.
Columbus doesn't count.
Right. All right, man. I think that's cool.
That's all I got.
Peace. Until next
All right,
week.
we'll shut it down.